Welcome to the treasurer portion of today's training. Richard briefly talked about some of the requirements. I'll be getting into some of those same requirements in more detail. Now, keep in mind, 50 minutes to discuss everything is probably a little bit on the light side. But one of the things I'll be doing over the Christmas holidays is I'm going to be developing training videos on specific forms. That way, you'll be able to get more detailed instructions and step-by-step procedures to filling out the different forms. And I'm referring to forms like the ACC-9 from the Air Cadet, talking about ISC, registering your company or renewing it, the CRA forms, the charity return, and the GST rebate return for that applies to some squadrons. I'll be focusing on those type of forms, providing more detailed instructions. And today I'm just going to be covering a highlight of all these various forms and activities. Essentially, in the next 15 minutes, we're going to give you a bird's eye view of what life is like for a treasurer within an SSC's committee during a typical squadron year. So what I'm going to get you to do, I'm going to make this a little interactive, so you're not just listening to me talk. In the chat, if you could just type in what squadron you're from, just so I have an idea what squadrons are represented here. Well, we have a few different squadrons here. So this is where I'm going to assume that, I think I know a couple of you probably have some experience. I'm going to start assuming that you're a brand new treasurer and you just got elected. And just to give you a bit of background, I'm affiliated with 41 Hercules Squadron in Regina as well. I'm actually currently the treasurer for them. I was a treasurer for them for 3 years. I was the chair for the last 2 years. I thought I was going to get to retire, but they talked me to coming back being treasurer again for them. And so that's where my background is. I know at 41, we usually have our elections in the spring. And there's a reason why we do that. Because typically, for the start of a typical year, one of the first things that your duty as a treasurer is to work with the CO or the other officers and coming up with a budget for the upcoming training year. This is usually one of the first activities. I know we typically will have a planning session over the summer. We'll talk about what training activities we're going to be doing. We'll then talk about what fundraisers we'll be able to run and what kind of money they'll bring in or estimate to bring in, and what kind of expenses we're going to have. Now, the last 2 years with COVID has kind of thrown that completely into uncertainty. This is where it's been hard to budget when you don't know what's going to happen in the next year in terms of what we're allowed to do. But it's a good idea to go through it, just to get an idea of what kind of money you're going to need, if any, and what you're going to need to raise. Now, we've had a lot of restrictions on what type of fundraisings we can do the last 2 years. And apparently it looks like there's going to be some more changes in the fundraising process within the squadron. But we'll just have to wait and see what happens from the D&D side on that aspect. On the other hand, this is where our expenses haven't been high, with D&D canceling out of most trips, out of the local region trips. Our reason for expenditures has dropped quite a bit as well. So this is where you just need to account for that in the budget. And you can do it on an Excel spreadsheet. If you have an accounting program, some accounting programs allow you to do it. Or if you have use the ACC-9 software, it allows you to set up a budget. Just no matter how you do it, you can create a budget. Now, the other option you can do is you work with the CEO, and usually your chair is heavily involved in the rest of your executive with this process. The other item that you need to start thinking about is doing bookkeeping for the year. That's another key task of the treasurer, is maintaining the books for the squadron. Now, again, this is where you have some flexibility. The Air Cadet League, they provide a software called ACC9. That's our reporting. That's our report we have to provide to them every year, but it also includes a bookkeeping version. And this last year, they made major improvements to it, so it could be used as a comprehensive bookkeeping system, as well as reporting system for your squadron. And I'm just going to start just kind of show it to you now. So in order to access this, you just go to the aircadetleague.com. That's the main website for the National Air Cadet League. And to access these forms, oh, no, I'm sorry. I am not on the right. Just give me a minute. Okay, there we go. Now we're at the Air Cadet League. And I'm just going to go back to the main page here. So when you go to the Air Cadet League, you come to this page. And in order to find the ACC9, you just go over to Library. And under Library, you'll see Document and Forms. And by the way, there's a lot of other forms related to running the squadron located in this section. I'm going to just be focusing on the ACC9 right now. So you just go to the Forms. And under Forms, and actually I'm going to try to make my screen larger here. That's where you'll see this section, ACC9. There's a version of this, they have numerous versions. There's a version, like if you just have one bank account, you're probably just better off using the multiple account feature. Now, this multiple account feature is one that has the bookkeeping aspect to it. There is a version for the report only. This is where, because some squadrons, they use an actual bookkeeping software to maintain their books. So in that case, you don't need to use the bookkeeping part within ACC9 software. But you do need to transfer your total income and expenses and the balance sheet numbers over to the ACC9. That's where you can use this version, the ACC9 report only. It essentially gives you the reporting pages that's needed to fill in, and you just transfer your data over from your bookkeeping, like manually type it over. So I'm going to just take a look. I'm going to just go to the ACC9 here. So with the ACC9, this is where it's a fairly comprehensive program. There's a lot of tabs, but it's not as bad as it looks. The first tab is Start the Year. This is where you just enter some basic information about your squadron. You enter the language, the squadron number, your squadron name, the number of cadets. Now, it already has a few accounts set up. Like these are essentially your bank accounts and investment accounts. You can rename them, and you just enter your opening balances from last year. This is a common mistake that a lot of squadrons make. They forget about these opening balances. And when they get to the end of the year and the final reports and send them in, I have to contact them saying, you're out of balance by $20,000. And a lot of times it's because of the opening balances is incorrect. You also have your petty cash balance. You select the year, your date for the year end, which is typically August 31st. Again, there's information from last year, like total assets, retained earnings, surplus deficit, current liabilities. Again, these are all things that you carry over from last year's sheets. Now, one thing I'm going to mention is I know there's a handful of squadrons that actually hire an accountant to prepare their year-end financial statements, which is perfectly fine. But just be careful. More accountants, I'm a CPA accountant myself as well. We often have to follow certain accounting standards when we prepare financial statements. And that's where the Air Cadet League, they don't follow all those standards exactly the same. So especially with retained earnings, there could be a significant difference between what your last year's ACC 9 is telling you and what your accountant is telling you on your financial statements. It's just the way they value assets, especially. With the Air Cadet League, they just want you to value all your assets at $1. Whereas on many accounting statements, they will report the value of your asset purchases and there will be a value. So essentially, we just need to adjust retained earnings to make it work. But that's where if you have any questions about that, just give me or Richard a call and we can help you out. So I'm just going to go to the next tab. Under data setup, again, this is where you can, it brings up all your accounts. You just enter your opening balance. And that's where you just kind of fill in the initial gaps. There's a lot more worksheets here that you can use to provide a background history. The key ones are revenue and expense. Now you probably won't be able to see a lot of this in fine print, but this is like the equivalent of a general ledger. You just go line by line. In this case, this is the revenue page. You just list all your deposits. And that's where you just list all your deposits and you just categorize it. And this is where you have all the various categories along the top for revenue items. And some of them you can customize. These all match up with lines on the ACC 9 report. Likewise, for expenses, you would do the same thing. You would just itemize each expenditure you have and categorize it using the pre-built-in categories. Now, there are other things like claim tracking. You don't need to use all of these. Monthly financial transactions. This is where you can start breaking out month by month. Here's the budget tracker I was referring to. This is where you can use this spreadsheet in order to create a budget. And then the ones in red, this is the actual reports. The ones in red is the actual reports that need to be submitted to our office. Essentially, it's the base information about your squadron, the contact information. You don't sign at the bottom on the first page. That's where I sign once I review your financial statement. Then you have your revenue summary page, your expense page, your balance sheet. Now, we mainly use this for the bank account balances because under fixed assets, they want you to use a nominal value of $1 for all of your fixed assets. Under current liabilities, usually you don't have any liabilities, but if you do have an accounts payable, you would list it here. Long-term debts, most squadrons don't have long-term debts, but if you own a building, you might have a mortgage on the building, so you would list that here as well. And it's at the bottom here, where ideally this difference should be 0, which means it's in balance. If it's not in balance, and assuming it's not out of balance by just like a few dollars, like less than $10. The reason it might be out of balance by $1 to $10 is because of this section up here, where you have to value assets at $1. That could throw off the difference. But if you're off by thousands of dollars, odds are it's related to your bank accounts. You just need to you're either didn't enter your beginning balances properly, or not all your transactions are entered. So that's where you need to double check then. Under fixed assets, this is where you can list all your assets. Because one of the other jobs, and this is something you need to keep in mind or for your squadron, is your squadron should be looking at insurance policy if it owns actual assets. Like we've had instances over the last couple of years where a squadron had a break-in, and they let their insurance policy lapse. So of course they had to cover the break-in loss themselves. This is where the league has a policy, but it doesn't cover assets. Like say if the squadron bought a computer system or a flight simulation system or some extra range equipment that D&D doesn't normally provide. That's where you should be looking at an insurance policy for those items. And this is where, to help you keep track of it, you can use this page to list all your assets. Now, one of the most common problems we have at the SCC level is having a transition every year between new committee members. And it's very easy to miss deadlines or forget about something. And this is where insurance is one of those things. Often insurance gets forgotten about, and this is where you need to, you don't find out about it until it's too late. You have your loss, and then you have to recover pay for the damages or loss yourself. So that's the ACC 9. And like I said, I'm going to be developing some extra training videos, just focus on the ACC 9, going into more details. So that's your starting point. You can use that for your bookkeeping, or you can use any other bookkeeping system, whichever you prefer. And you also need to complete the red tabs, which is the actual ACC 9 report. That usually needs to be submitted by October or November. With COVID, we've had some major issues getting these submitted. Like 1/3 of our squadrons still haven't submitted ACC 9s from the previous year. And now we're starting into a brand new fiscal year. So this is where, if you need help with it, just contact us. I know I've been slowly working at them with my own accounting practice. I was shut down for 5 weeks because of COVID myself. I had caught COVID, and that put me so far behind this fall. But I will be working on this over the Christmas holidays. So I know some squadrons have sent stuff in. I have to make adjustments or ask questions on some of them. Bob, for your question, that was the new ACC 9 form I was just showing. And that's where I'll be providing more detailed training videos over the Christmas holidays. Now, these training videos will be accessible through the SKACL website or their YouTube channel. So just look out for emails. We'll announce when those videos are available. Now, this is where this is one of the core programs, ACC 9. But there's a lot of other forms that you need to complete as well. And the ACC 9 report is often the starting point to complete a lot of these other returns. Now, there's a handful of squadrons that have a legacy grant from SAS Culture or SAS Sports. This is where, if you're one of those squadrons, I believe there's 6 or 8 squadrons that receive this grant. It's important that you make sure you fill in their annual reporting form. This is usually sent out in October, and the deadline to complete it is the end of November. The reason why you want to get that form in is because if you lose that grant, there's probably no chance of getting it back again, because it's a legacy grant. The squadrons who are getting it have been getting it for probably decades, but once you lose it, there is no other grant to apply for. So it's very important to make sure that if you're one of those squadrons, and you can check in your last year's financial statements whether you got money from them or not, make sure you get that form completed by the end of November. The other form that you need to be aware of is corporations branch. Now, this is an ongoing issue we have with numerous squadrons. This is where, going forward, CRA is requiring all of our squadrons to get incorporated. So right now, we have about 8 or so squadrons that need to get incorporated. But we also have almost just as many or more squadrons who are incorporated but forgot to renew their corporation status. This is something that you need to do every year. And I'm going to this is where, to do this, you need to go to ISC. And again, this is where, if you need help with this, just reach out to us. Yeah, so you just need to go to isc.ca. And I'm going to just quickly go in here. This is where we'll have to go to incorporate you if you're not incorporated already. But this is where every year you need to file what's called an annual return. And you'll get a letter saying that your annual return is due, and it will provide you with an ISC code. So this is where you would just enter your entity number, which would also be in the letter, or your squadron name. I'm not going to do this, but we'll be doing a training video on stepping you through this as well. This is where you would then just have to file an annual return, where it asks for changes, like who are the new directors for the upcoming year? And are there any other changes to the structure of the company? Typically, you just need to enter your new directors. But this has to be done, assuming you have an August 31st year end. For most squadrons, this has to be done by January or February, or you get what's called struck off. Basically, when you get struck off, technically, you're not allowed to do business in Saskatchewan. You're not allowed to keep operating as a squadron, because you're no longer an authorized nonprofit corporation. So this is where it's very important that you got to do this annual return every year. And this is where, like, we have about 8 or 10 squadrons that are incorporated, but they're struck off for whatever reason. Now, to restore a corporation, this is where it depends how long they've been struck off for. I have some squadrons have only been struck off for a year or two during COVID. In that case, all we need to do is just file the financial statements, which the ACC9 forms the basis for, and we can get caught up. But if you've been struck off for 4 or 5 or more years, this is where you either got to provide all your financial statements for those missing years, or we need to start up a new corporation, which might be the easiest. Because one of the drawbacks of having a corporation is, according to the ISC guidelines, all the squadrons will be classified as a charity type non-profit corporation, and that's within Saskatchewan. What that means is, if your total revenue from the previous year is $25,000 or more, you will require either an audit, or if your parent committee passes a resolution, they can just have a review done, which means you need to go to a CPA accountant. in order to get the review done. Because as of legislation from a few years ago, only licensed CPA firms are allowed to do reviews and audits. If your previous year revenue is under $25,000, you can actually waive both the review and the audit. You can just submit your own financial statements. But for the squadrons that are more than 25,000, at minimum, you will need a review done. So that's something to keep in mind. That's why it might be more beneficial for the squadrons who are struck off for 5 years or more, just to renew a corporation rather than do a 5 years of review, especially if they're a larger squadron. So this is another requirement that you need to be aware of. Now, this is where it doesn't stop here. This is just provincial, renewing your provincial information. The next is Canada, the CRA, because they're going to be involved. Now, this is where this can be fun to deal with if you're a new treasurer. Essentially, to get at the CRA information, you just go to canada.ca. So you just go to canada.ca. This is the main website for the federal government. I'm clicking on English. You go down to taxes. And this is where there's a variety of information here. Now, with the new requirements by CRA and the Air Cadet League of Canada, all of our squadrons are going to have to get incorporated. That means you're going to have a business number. That business number is going to be your tax number with CRA. The next step is you could register as a charity. This is another issue that I believe Richard alluded to it in his presentation. It's going to be up to each squadron to decide if they want to become a registered charity or not. Now, in the past, whenever a squadron had a big donation and they were not a registered charity, they usually phoned up Richard and say, I have this donation. They made the donation to the provincial league, and then Richard would cut a check to the local squadron. Technically, CRA does not like that practice, and they are clamping down on that more and more every year. They don't want to see one organization with a charity number issuing charity receipts on behalf of another organization. So this is where, if you think you're going to need the charity receipts, you're going to have to register as a charity. Now, if this is something you're interested in, contact me, because the Air Cadet League has been working with CRA, and we have a standard template to use when you complete the application form to streamline the process. And it still is a multi-month process. So don't expect to say, I want a charity number and get it within a week or two. It's going to take several months. So this is where you need to provide a lot of background information, but this is where CRA and the Air Cadet League of Canada has worked out some language to use on that application form. Now, that would be under the charities and giving. Again, I'm going to do a training video on this as well, but also contact Richard and myself. We can help you out. This is where you would select registering for charity or qualified donor status. And then it creates a form that you would need to complete. Now, if you do have a charity number, there's another return you have to complete. It's called the 3010 annual return. This needs to be completed every year as well to maintain your charity status. And again, the bulk of the information will come from your ACC 9 form. In fact, in the new ACC 9 form, the spreadsheet I was showing, one of the very last tabs is a summary page that shows you the numbers that you can transfer directly into your 3010 form. So it tries to make your job simpler. But you do need to report it, and you also need to list all your directors. And actually on the 3010 form, they require their addresses and phone numbers as well. So you do need to have this information in place. Now, the final form, if you are a registered charity, that opens up another door of potential money for you. Because if I just go back here, the other form you can do is you could file a GST return. Because when you are a registered charities are allowed to get 50% of their GST, the GST they paid on expenses, they can get that back as a rebate. So that's the one advantage of getting a charity number, is just so you can access that GST rebate. I know at 41, we've been getting about $600 to $800 a year back for the GST rebate, which helps cover our review bill with our accountant that's about $1,000 to $1,200 a year. So it covers about 2/3 of it. So it is a benefit to getting a charity number. And then you also have the ability to issue charity receipts as well. Now, again, I'll have a video showing how to do the GST rebate, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. Now, the simplest way of doing this for your squadron is to register yourself as an authorized representative. Now, if this can be an interesting task, because I'll just give you my experiences. When I took over treasurer for 41, being accountant, that was my first thing. Well, if I got to deal with CRA, I'm going to have to get access to online access to their accounts so I can do it more effectively. Well, it took about 2 months to get access. A process that should normally only take a day or two, it took 2 to 3 months. Because one of the things they do is they ask, okay, who's the past authority? And this is where I don't know how many names I had to rattle, and I had to phone the previous executive members and CEO and other officers asking them who had this role whose name could be listed as the CRA representative. And essentially, they were giving me a list of names and none of them worked. I don't know how far back the information was outdated. But this is where what I ultimately had to do, I had to send them a special email, and I had to send them a copy of the list of directors according to ISC, our corporate profile. And that's where I was able to finally get approval. Once you get approval, then it makes the filing of the charity return and the GST return much more easier to do. It'll make your life a lot simpler. But just again, when you have a new transition, your squadron is just going to have to get into the habit that this information also needs to be updated on a regular basis. So this is just when you think I must be out of forms, there is one more form that I need to discuss. And this is one that you need to work with your CO on. That's LSA funds. And actually, what LSA, it's local support allocation, I believe is the abbreviation for that. Essentially, it's funds that D&D is providing to individual squadrons. Usually it's based on a per cadet basis, but you need to provide receipts. So since you're the treasurer, you'll likely have the receipts. You'll need to work with the CO who's responsible for submitting the claim to Winnipeg, which is where our regional headquarters is for D&D, for the cadets. They need to provide these receipts, and D&D will reimburse all the expenses up to the squadron's dollar limit for any eligible expenses, which is basically everything but paying for the assessments fees for the league. They don't cover computer expenses, as in like internet virtual training type expenses for some reason. And there's other expenses they don't cover. But for a lot of things like office supplies, extra meals for cadets, training costs, sport activities, they do cover that. You just got to get the receipts into D&D through the CO. And this is where you should be working with your CO. They should be coming to you asking for the receipts, but in case they don't, you should be going to them. Now, the deadline was the end of November, but this is where, if your squadron hasn't done this yet, talk to your CO. They may still be able to get the receipts in. And a lot of times after the initial round of allocations, there's often money left over. That's where they'll go back and reallocate more. That's where your squadron, if you have excess receipts, you may be able to get additional funding later in the new year. But you do just got to get the receipts in. So again, that's a very easy source of funding that you need to tap into. There's a lot of squadrons that forget to apply or don't bother applying. And basically they're out of luck. And the squadrons who do submit extra receipts, they're the ones who end up benefiting, because then the surplus funds are allocated to the other squadrons. So that is the last of the forms. This is where there's a lot of forms that you need to keep in mind. But you just essentially need to make sure, like as you transition from treasurer to treasurer, make a list of these forms and pass it on to the new person. Because what I find most commonly is people just don't know about all these forms until it's too late. Like I said, I have to contact probably about 40% of the squadrons in order to get them updated with their registration status. Because either they forgot to submit this form or multiple forms. We still have about 13 squadrons that we need ACC 9s for from last year. And then we still have this year's ACC 9 that's now due. So this is where COVID has put a strain on trying to get this information, but it's something that we need to get focused on and get up to date. Because CRA has been tolerant. This is where they may not be as tolerant going forward. And same with ISC. So essentially, there's a lot of work, but this is where if you have any questions at all, just contact Richard or myself, and we'll be happy to help out. Now, we probably got about another 5 to 10 minutes left. Are there any questions? And actually, if you want, you can unmute yourself and just ask it directly if you want, or type it in the chat box, one of the two.
Brian, maybe just tell everybody where they are to send their ACC 9 to you or to whoever in the organization, please.
Okay. I'm just going to type in my email. You can either send it directly to me at brianl@skacl.ca, or you could also send it to the Richard at the general email address he provided in his session. Like it's richardp@skacl.ca. Any other questions?
Hi there. My name is Tara, and I'm with 34 Roland J. Groom. My question is, if my ACC 9 has a green box and it says that it's balanced, what my question is for the bank balancing, like, is there a bank reconciliation tab that I can use? Like, what are the steps for that?
Within the ACC 9 form itself, no, I don't believe there is a formal bank reconciliation, or it's not like a typical bank reconciliation you see in QuickBooks.
It's got a spot where we can check it off.
Yes.
And like I'm doing like a manual with my bank statements and the ACC 9, and I am balanced that way, but there is no formal reconciliation that we can do on there, right?
Yes. Yeah, there's limitations within the spreadsheet, what they can do.
Okay.
But this is where I'm just going to go to the expense tab here. And just going to increase the zoom. Yeah, this is where here's the column. I can just, yeah, the very first column, that's where you can check it off saying, okay, I reconciled it. And basically you're just manually comparing your bank statement versus what you have entered.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so you're just double checking that you did enter that bank statement line.
Okay.
Brian, isn't the second page, if all the figures are right? No, second one from the front, from the main input. Those data set up, yeah. Those each account should balance
Yes.
there too, though. So that's another quick check.
Yeah, this is kind of a rough reconciliation as well.
Yeah.
But keep in mind, though, a weakness here is if you've already entered a couple, say you entered 3 months of data all at once, this is going to have everything you entered. And if you're just trying to reconcile 1 month at a time, this won't work. You would only have to enter the 1 month of data in, come back here, double check it, then go back into your second month, come back here and double check it. It's not like in QuickBooks or Simply where you can enter the date, you can enter your bank balance as of that date, and then it starts comparing what you've entered based on the date you used. It doesn't do that type of reconciliation.
And then my other question was then GST, because you can't do the full year. You can't even do a buy. You got to do it quarterly, right?
Yes, or every 6 months.
Right. So then that kind of, I don't know if there's something we can do on the ACC 9 to help simplify those periods that we need to submit for.
Yeah, I know one trick I usually do. I usually wait till the end of the year to submit the GST rebate. I just take the total GST for the year and it's divided by 2 and claim it on each of the 2 periods, 6-month periods.
Yeah, that's kind of what I did as well. But then your different totals kind of need to match that as well. But
yeah, like there is a column here for, oh, why is my screen? Like there is a column here to keep track of GST. So it does allow you to track it. It's just, like I said, if you want to do just the first 6-month GST rebate, just make sure you only enter the first 6 months of transactions. Then the GST will give you the correct total.
I believe on one of the tabs towards the end, it'll let you know how much your GST is for the entire year. And then we only claim 50% of that.
Yes, that's correct. The nonprofit rebate is 50% of your total GST that you spent on purchases.
So then my next question is, when we submit and get funding back, what happens with that GST because that's part of it, is it not?
Yeah, that's where normally they haven't been asking for that GST back. Basically, this is where it's kind of a gray area, like with the LSA grant.
Right. That was just my concern. I don't want to ruffle feathers or anything, but I was just worried that if we're double dipping on the GST, because if we're submitting it to get a reimbursement, but then the higher ups are as well, is that like
yeah, essentially D&D, they haven't been accounting for the GST. They've just been covering it all back.
Okay.
And basically it's like normally if it was a GST taxable income, we would have to collect GST on that income, but it's exempt, GST exempt.
Okay, perfect.
So it's, Yeah, I find most of the both SKACL, they're like that as well. They just look at the total receipt and reimburse the full amount.
And then my last question, and then I'll bow out. With CRA, there are owners on ours that I don't know who they are. So how would I go about, or who should be classified as an owner on our CRA?
Right now, it should be primarily the executive directors. Those are the key ones that should be listed because they're the ones who have the current obligations. Or they should at least be a director listed. And this is based on what you report to ISC.
Right.
With ISC, that's where you list your official directors.
Yeah,
and
which you can change and update as it goes along, right?
Yeah,
but then
as a charity nonprofit, and this is where it gets confusing. According to ISC, there's two types of nonprofits. There's membership-based and charity-based. But because we do rely on fundraising from the public, we're classified as a charity-based nonprofit for provincial purposes.
Mm-hmm.
What that means is we then need to have a minimum of 3 directors on our board listed with ISC. Now, when we talk about the federal government or CRA, their definition of charity is completely different than what the provincial definition is. That's where if you want to be a registered charity to issue donation receipts, you need to become a registered charity with the federal level.
Which we have done that.
Yes,
but
yeah.
The people that are on file there are either no longer or maybe they're just so high up I don't know who they are. But
no. Odds are they're probably from 10, 15, 20 years ago that no longer have any connection with the squadron.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I encountered at 41 when I tried to get on as a rep. Basically, it was trying to deal with their security questions. Mm-hmm. Well, we need to talk to these people, and of course, they won't tell me who their names are. It's up to me to tell them who the reps are, which I didn't know. What I had to do was essentially, I had to send CRA an updated corporate profile from ISC that showed the current directors, which also listed me as the treasurer. That was the only way I could get set up as authorized rep. And then once I got that step done, then I could go about cleaning up the rest of the names.
So I'm signed up as a representative. So then I would just have to submit my ISC directors list, and then hopefully I'll be able to get full access because I've got access and I can do GST and all of that on there, but it's just to get rid of the previous owners to make it current.
Yeah, that's where you may need to have a few phone calls with CRA to get that straightened out.
Gotcha. Thank you so much, Brian.
Well, you're welcome. Yeah, this is where it can be like a hassle getting set up with CRA properly at first. But once you do, it makes the GST and the charity return very simple to do after that. You just got to keep the list updated. Any other questions? So I should ask, how many of you are new treasurers? Maybe just indicate in the box if you're new to the role or if you've done this for a year or two already. And also another question I'll ask is, what type of trainings would you want to see? Like when we do these training video series, are there any specific topics that you would want to see covered? If you have any specific topics, just again, feel free to type that into the chat box, and I'll make sure I save the chat before I close the room. Yeah, that's where I'm going to be using 41's reporting requirements as a guinea pig for these videos. When I file the updated returns for 41 Hercules Squadron, that's where I'll be doing the videos based on that. Okay, insurance policy choices. Yes, that's often a tricky one. That's where usually it's a good discussion to have with your insurance broker. That's where it's good to have a list of questions, or I mean, a list of your assets, and take that into your insurance broker, and then they'll probably ask you a series of what if type scenarios and see what's most appropriate for your squadron. Tara, yes. Go ahead if you have another question.
My other question is Google.
Yes.
Is the ACC9 adaptable, or if I was to do it on the Google Docs, is there going to be any errors with the ACC?
I'm not 100% sure, but I'm probably 99% sure that the answer is yes, there could be problems.
Oh, okay.
Because with the AC, this is where I used to do a lot of programming, and I created these type of elaborate spreadsheets myself for other agencies. And I know in behind the scenes, they use a lot of what's called macro programming,
Right.
like Visual Basic. And I'm pretty sure they have problems with different versions of Excel running. Like if you have an older version of Excel, that could create problems running the newer version. In fact, on the website, there is an option to download a version that works with versions prior to 2003. So I imagine with Google Sheets, there would definitely be problems. I haven't tried doing it myself, but just knowing how this ACC9 is programmed, I would imagine it would create issues. You would need to have Excel.
Yeah, that's where I've run into issues, because the computer that I'm running is just from home and it doesn't have the Excel, I guess, program in it. So I've just been using the Google Docs because I can access everything and input everything there. But as for submitting it, I guess I need to pay for this Excel and have it proper then?
Yeah, like to get a license to complete Word, like the Microsoft Suite, I think it's about $100, and it actually gives you a license for 5 copies. So it might be something you might want to talk with your squadron about. Like the CO may be able to use that license too for cadet activities.
Yeah, which I know that they do. I just didn't get a computer or anything that has that already on it. So I will talk with our squadron about that.
Yeah, you may just want to check to see if they have an available license that you can install on your personal computer then for use for squadron purposes.
Thanks so much.
And I've got another question here from Carrie. Are there certain requirements for the number of directors on the executive board? Now, this is where, by default, the minimum you have to have at least 3 directors for a charity nonprofit corporation in Saskatchewan. But there's also corporation minutes or bylaws, and depending on how your squadron was incorporated, they could have a minimum number of directors required, and it could be more than 3. Legally, the minimum has to be 3, but I've seen some squadrons where they might have something like 4 or 5 directors required. In that case, you would need to have that minimum number. Now, they don't have to be executive, like on the executive committee. They could just be directors at large, but you just have to have whatever your corporate bylaws state. Now, again, it varies from squadron to squadron, but this is where, if you need help with that, I might be able to get at the information somehow. I'll have to look at what we have in our archives, as well as I might be able to get the information from ISC. So for Carrie, for your question, yeah, maybe for your squadron, you might be set up where you do need 5 for your squadron. And that actually brings up another issue. We are running into issues with some squadrons who don't have enough directors or enough parents to volunteer. if that's the case, reach out to your area director. This is an issue I brought up at our director meetings for the province. And that's where some of our directors may be willing to actually come on board as directors of your squadrons, if need to, just to kind of get the minimum number of bodies required, just so that you could have a functioning corporate nonprofit. So this is something that we need to work on, especially as we try to rebuild a lot of our squadrons over the next year. Any other questions?
I have one. This is
Yeah.
Bonnie here. Is there a charge to every time we update the ISC to who the directors are?
Yes. Well, no, to update the directors, they don't charge for that. There's just an annual return fee that you have to pay when you file your annual return. And it's, what was it, $10 or something like that? It's not bad. Like, it's all, they subsidize it heavily compared to what normal companies have to pay. But to update directors, no, there is no charge for that.
Okay,
But you
'cause
do
that's-
need to have that ISC code from your annual return. You'll need to have that code in order to make changes to your directors.
Okay, so that's a comment I'd like to make, because I worked on another board a few years ago, and every time the directors changed, I know that they had to go back to ISC and change that. So that's an important piece for, I know when we were setting up our org chart for our squadron, that's one that we watched to make sure that we didn't have every SSC person with a role necessarily named to that executive, knowing that we'd have to go in and change that eventually every time one, like the transportation share changed, right? So we
Yes.
that's one thing that we're watching for. We haven't registered yet, but that's one thing we watched for.
Yeah, because there's actually is a legal responsibility. This is where this probably won't happen, but directors can be responsible for certain things like payroll taxes, GST taxes owing, environmental issues. And that's where technically they can go back to ISC and make a list of all the directors, and everyone officially listed can be held responsible. That's why it's important to keep that list up to date. So if you have someone who leaves as a director, they're no longer responsible from that day on. Well, this is where, if you do have any other questions that you think of, just feel free to email me at the email I typed in. Well, thank you for attending the session. Hopefully you picked up a few tips, and this is where I look forward to working with you in the future here. Now, for the squadrons that do have requirements to do, I'll be contacting those squadrons somehow. But yeah, this is where we're trying to get everything cleaned up in this upcoming year.